start learning. So the thing that I think is different when I was like a fifth grade teacher is, especially when I was like 22 years old, is I would think that Dante was acting up just because I took it personally, like he didn't like me or he just wanted to be bad. And then once I really understood my community that I was teaching in and the history of education and inequality, I understood that there could be a lot of reasons why Dante is misbehaving. What I learned was he would often miss the bus. He wasn't getting enough sleep. He wasn't eating breakfast because he missed the bus. And if you are 10 years old and full of energy and you didn't get a good meal last night and you missed your breakfast and you didn't sleep well, you would be pretty cranky with the person trying to get you to do this work that you need to focus on as well. So I used to have tricks that I needed to do. I had to keep a drawer full of snacks, bars and all these things. And I had a system with certain students when I knew their situation. If Dante came in, it's like that Snickers commercial. He's like, you need a Snickers? Like Dante needed a Snickers or something so he could kind of be his normal self. And I would, come here, and he knew the routine. After a while, he'd just go to the snack drawer, get his stuff, go to the bathroom or somewhere quiet where he could eat without disturbing, and we keep it moving. And so, those were the things that I think are difficult, depending on where you teach. Teaching is difficult anyway, even the best circumstances. But if there's a lot you have to do before you can get to fractions, the work is even harder. Now, switch to working with college kids. You don't have to go to college. Of course, I believe it should be accessible to anybody who wants it, but you're making a choice when you come into a college classroom. So the expectations, I think, as an instructor are really much different for your students. What's interesting, what I found working with VCU, which has students from really, really diverse backgrounds, and one of the things I really loved about VCU is, especially I worked with sophomores a lot, and the assumptions you have about people in college being completely independent and not really needing a lot of coaching or a lot of support is actually false. And I found that in some cases, I really did have to give a lot of support to college students, but it was in an effort to set them up to be independent. And some of that was based on what schools did they go to for K-12, or maybe they didn't get the same type of information and preparation, not from lack of trying, that will prepare them to be as independent as we expect students to be the minute they turn 18 and they step on a college campus. So I think those are the main differences. And of course, the diversity, which I said, if you are talking about Richmond Public Schools, we have almost 20% of our students are Latin American background. The vast majority are going to be African American, and then we have a small percentage of white and Asian students. But our schools look very similar because of that. And at universities like VCU, not at all, you just definitely have much more diversity, which I really appreciated.
That's really interesting what you said about the difference in lower education, not lower education, but like public education and higher education. So my mom's a teacher. She's been teaching for about 20 years in elementary.
Wow.
And I just wanted to ask what your perspective is on the kind of similar to the last question about the culture, but the learning expectations, because at least from what I see it, like elementary school, middle and high, it's more about memorizing facts. And then I had to go through a large transitionary period my first year of college, because it's a lot more comprehending and understanding the concept.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering what your perspective is on that.
That's a great point, Dalton. And thank your mom for 20 years. You know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about that teacher exhaustion. I think you're right. I think that there is a lot of parroting back information. If you, even when I think about my own education, even though I went to private schools, you were a good student if you could memorize well. And I could memorize well. And I could, I'd listen in class. If you told me and I read and I did a little review, I could parrot back exactly what you wanted me to. I don't think that made me necessarily smarter than the other students, but because I learned how to do that and I could do that at a really young age, I was tracked into gifted programming. And I think you all probably were in some gifted programs. But when I think about it, it was the luck of the draw. I did well on a couple of tests when I was little. I memorized well. And because of that, my whole life's trajectory was different than most of the kids that I taught. And when I look at kids at this school, at other schools like this within Richmond Public Schools, we often track kids not for their abilities, but what they have access to. So, me coming from a two-parent household with parents who believed education that was really important, that were going to make sure I did my homework and go to parent-teacher conferences, versus students who, of course, at my schools that I work with now, their parents want their children to do well. However, maybe they didn't finish high school themselves. And so it becomes difficult. I taught fifth grade and I have a PhD. At that time, I had an undergraduate degree. I know how to do fractions. When I tell you I had to learn how to do fractions again to teach the fifth grade, so you're talking about the parents that I work with now. And I remember this was so vivid to me. I'm 22 years old, not much older than you. I'm talking to a parent and she's not much older than me with a 10-year-old. And I said, I think that if you're able to work with them and, after school and help them, I really think they can do better because they're not really doing their homework. And I'm explaining it and we're doing after school. So could you reinforce this? Like teachers would say that to parents. That's what you tell them, practice with your kids. This mom broke down in tears and admitted to me that she can't help her child. I don't read well. I don't understand this myself. I can't help him. And that for me was actually a huge aha moment in my teaching, which is when I started doing Saturday academies. And this is before it was a thing. Like I taught kids on Saturdays in my home. Probably couldn't do that now. There are a lot of laws and things, but like I brought kids to my house on Saturdays. We did Saturday Academy so they could pass their SOLs. I was after school. I did parent learning groups and I did it in a way so it didn't matter if you didn't understand. It didn't even matter if you could read. I taught parents how to fake it so that they could give their kids the confidence to do their work. There are certain phrases you can say to keep them going, even if you don't understand. You just have to be invested. So I think, those were the things that were different about K-12 versus, higher education, and things that I think the discrepancies, and especially when we talk about Title I schools like I've worked in, that you're just starting from a level that's very different than if you are teaching in a more affluent area where it's two-parent households, middle class, if the child isn't doing well in school, they're going to put them. I used to teach at, what is it called? It was one of those tutoring agencies that kids came to. And I was, of course, I was a teacher. I had to have a second job. And I'm blanking on the name. But the kids who came in there, actually, most of the time were amazing students. But it was their parents pushing them so they could get a 1,600 on their SATs, and I'm going to pay this person $25 an hour 3 times a week to make sure it happens. Whereas families I work with, that is not an option at all.
So as you've had like a long career in education, has there been anything that has like stood out to you, shocked you, or like inspired you?
Let me see. stood out, shocked, or inspired. I'm just thinking. I mean, I think generally I'm inspired almost every time I'm with, students. I'll give an example, a recent example. So one of the offices in my department is called CFIT. It stands for Centers for Families in Transition. And they actually work with our McKinney-Vento families. McKinney-Vento is a policy which basically states that if you are homeless, if you're a student, a K-12 student who's homeless, you have a right to public education. And what that means is resources have to be put in place. You may not have a home address, but you should receive transportation, regular transportation to your school, and you should receive access to a quality education without interruption. And so our CFIT team, we have 4 people. So think about this. In a district of 25,000 kids, we have a team of 4 full-time employees whose whole job is to help homeless students. Things you can pick up on, that means we have that many homeless students that you need a department to work for them. So I always think about that and I let that sink in. So that's the issue right there. And our CFIT kids are some of the most resilient students you will ever see. Someone who may not know, am I going to a shelter tonight? Am I going to a motel tonight? Will we have somewhere to sleep tonight? And in spite of that, they're expected to go to school and learn the same as all the other children who don't have those things to worry about. So we recently had an opportunity to connect with the with the Secretary of Education's team to show a really cool thing we did in an app we created. Our students helped create it. The one Grady probably told you about it, Mr. Hart, about Monument Avenue. Well, we needed students